Today we are thinking about, I'm hoping the second slide of my sermon will appear. Yeah, we go. We're thinking about hospitality, and I want to start by asking you a question about what you think the difference is between entertaining and showing hospitality. So have a think for a moment. Might the difference be between entertaining and showing hospitality? Any ideas? Hopefully I can hear you. Yes, you have to have the house tidy if you're entertaining, and you don't have to if you're. I think that's a very solid insight into the difference. Anything else that comes to mind? Okay. Catherine, did you? Yeah. Entertaining is about yourself. Hospitality is about those who are coming. Great. Well, look, those sort of thoughts that you have are actually spot on. I came across an article this week from a lady called Jen Wilkin, and she lists some of the things that, in her mind, demonstrate very importantly the difference between these. Entertaining, she says, hopes to impress, whereas hospitality desires to bless. Worth having a thought about. Entertaining wants things to be perfect. Have to get the right menu. The house has to be spotless, whereas hospitality wants people to feel comfortable. Entertaining is always focused on the next course. I like this one. She says, hospitality burns the sauce because it was listening to a story. And I think we've all experienced that difficulty when we've had people in our house. I haven't done that since Christmas. Entertaining obsesses over what went wrong, whereas hospitality rejoices in the friendship and intimacy that was shared. It's really one of the interesting things, can I say, about church that I think I've discovered. It's actually better when things go wrong. Isn't it a little bit better? Because it just eases the atmosphere. And everybody goes, well, actually, people are pretty normal around here, and those sort of things. Like this morning, we had a real laugh in the media room. The computer didn't want to work. The screens didn't want to work. And I was just thinking, yeah, this is kind of normal for us. And then lastly, she says, entertaining, exhausted, states it was nothing really, whereas hospitality, content, thinks it was nothing really. Well worth considering the difference between entertaining and hospitality today as we are thinking about hospitality. And hospitality, whether you're looking in Scripture or reading magazines that talk about family or community life together, or reading articles from sociologists and psychologists, hospitality is a really amazingly important part of our lives. It builds connections with us. It builds community. It enables barriers to be broken down. It enables prejudice to be overcome. Hospitality allows people to feel not only connected but wanted. Hospitality apparently is really amazingly good for our social and mental well-being. Hospitality can enable us to see and to understand. It improves our empathy and our insight enormously into the people that we are around. Last Tuesday, we had presbytery here all day. Because the forecast was terrible, we decided that we would just give everybody dinner. Usually people would just walk off into Maynooth somewhere to find dinner when it comes to that. So the clerk decided, no, let's feed everybody. So we ordered pizza, and it arrived in, and we made some salads and all of this. And honestly, we had one of the most difficult presbytery meetings we've had in 21 years. And it was enormously better because we just all had dinner together. It just created relational capital, or whatever the right phrases are around that. When we offer hospitality to one another, it does an enormous amount of good in our lives. And we've been thinking recently about the opposite of feeling included and welcomed and wanted, this sense of loneliness that exists in our world today. And hospitality absolutely overcomes that. Jesus has lots to say, and the New Testament has lots to say about hospitality. Romans 15 and 7 simply bears out a little bit further what Jesus says in his famous verse in John 13:35. Not only in showing hospitality do we help each other, do we create community for ourselves, do we enable the things that we've just mentioned, but in Scripture, hospitality is said to be one of the most powerful ways we have of helping others discover the love of God in their lives. By this will all men know that you're my disciples, Jesus says, if you love one another. And I don't know what you think the most evangelistic act you'll ever do is, but I certainly have come to believe over the years that the most evangelistic act we'll ever do is to love each other. Why is that? Because people notice, and we're going to see that in Jesus' teaching. People notice how we are with each other. People look at a church and they can see whether the people care for each other or whether really it's all about performance and accomplishment and looking right. In one sense, whether we're entertaining or whether we're showing hospitality. And as Paul rightly comments in Romans 15, when we accept one another just as Christ has accepted us, we bring praise to God. And people see that in us. So Jesus teaches us some really interesting things in Luke 14, and we've communion today, so that I'm just giving you a little quick walk through these wonderful words that he's given us. But he teaches a number of important things. Firstly, when we are receiving hospitality, Jesus calls us to humility. All sorts of times in Jesus' life we see him enjoying all this, drinks, meals, banquet stories, receiving it simply abound. But in this particular context, he's been invited for dinner to an important person's house, and some discussions arising in that. And in response, Jesus begins by calling us to humility. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. So the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this person your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place, because by that time all the other seats are taken. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. When Sheena and I got married, we did our best to honor this ancient tradition, at least with our family. So we planned the layout of our wedding reception and had our family members seated closest to us, and then our friends kind of dispersed around the rest. We've never worked out whether it was helpfully or unhelpfully. The hotel staff completely got it wrong and inverted our plan. So actually our closest family were the ones who sat the furthest away at our wedding, and it was an interesting thing to do. But in my personal opinion, given the number of comments and slagging remarks that were made by our family, I think the further away they were, the better in that. In Jesus' day, where people sat at a meal, and in some cultures around the world today it remains so, where people sat was really vital. Tables were generally a kind of U-shape, and in the center would sit the host, and then closest to them would be the left and the right, the most important as you worked your way out from that. And Jesus observes this going on in this location where he is, and he makes this simple observation that we as his followers are not to buy into all that performance. And he gives us good reason, because often when we do choose to be humble in certain environments, people will indeed invite us up, but that's not the point he's making. The point that he's making is that we as his followers, as those who now know ourselves as the children of God, well, we don't need to be posturing for importance. We don't need to be asserting how special we are. We're freed from that because we know who we are now. We are children of the living God. And we don't need to try and show we're more important than those around us, because now we regard those around us as our brothers and sisters. We all stand level at the foot of the cross. So Jesus calls us to this humility. And such modesty, once again, is not just so that we show ourselves to be kind of nicer than others. It's because of its missional impact. Who are the people you are most likely to trust in your life? Who are the people you're most likely to want to share some of the struggles and burdens and failures that you have? I know in me, it's not those who are like proud peacocks wanting to tween their feathers and have us notice how great they are, and they all seem to be perfect in every way. That's the people that you realize these are genuine, authentic people who love those around them and welcome whoever they are next to. So this humility in hospitality is a really important thing for us to remember. Sheena and I had some Chinese students for Christmas a few years ago. A totally fascinating experience. One of the things that we always ask people at Christmas to say a little bit where they're from. And one of the guys said he was from a town 36 kilometers south of Shanghai, and just from a small town 36 kilometers, and I thought China. So I said, if you don't mind me asking, well, what is a small town in China? And he said, there's not more than 5 million probably where I live. But one of the ladies who was there found it really strange that I invited her to sit in a particular chair, because that was the chair the most important person would sit in. And I had to explain it's totally fine, and I need to actually be near the kitchen so I can help Sheena with all the serving that's going on. When we adopt such an attitude amidst hospitality, we point to the fact that there's something happened in our lives that makes us different. And that something that has happened, of course, is Jesus. The second thing in our reading that Jesus points us to is generosity when we are offering hospitality. Verse 12, then Jesus said to his host, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Now, some of you are probably optimistically thinking, does this mean I never have to invite my family back again? No, it doesn't mean that at all. And Jesus is not implying that we shouldn't hang out with our friends or build relationship with them. But his point is clear, isn't it? All of us are in our relationship with Jesus because of one thing only, his grace. At the church planting conference yesterday, at the end of my second seminar, I think it was, there was a gentleman who now lives in Donegal, and I don't know his name, but he clearly knew me from way, way back. And at the end of it, he thanked me, publicly thanked me for what I had to share. And as everybody was walking out of the room, he quietly came over to me and said, hey, Keith, you certainly come a long way from that guy who was throwing stones at the army. And it was a wonderful little reminder for me when I think about my childhood and the direction my life is going and where God has led me. How absolutely incredible. I came to faith because one of my teachers arrived at my door one Saturday morning and invited me to a Christian youth group. I didn't believe in God. I was angry at God. But no one had invited me to anything else. And I thought I'd go along. And look what God has done. Some of you are thinking he could do more, and I know that as well. All of us are in exactly the same place. And given the real importance and significance and impact of hospitality, is it really any wonder that Jesus wants us to widen our circles a little bit when we're sharing the resources that we have, when we're choosing who we hang out with for coffee, when we're choosing those we might invite along, when we approach how we celebrate Easter or Christmas, or what we do with new folks who've moved into the area around us? Isn't it really no surprise that he wants us to reach beyond just our circles of friends to those who actually might need us, to show love to them? Jesus leaves the 99 sheep behind, and he puts them in the middle in a place where they can see an enemy. It's not that he abandons them, but he leaves them behind to go after the lost one. And Jesus calls us to generosity in how we use our resources and to do the same thing. And then lastly, in this passage, Jesus points us to the greatest invitation of all. And there is both tragedy and wonder as we read through the words that are here for us in Luke 14. Back in 2008, I think it is, many of you have been forced to hear me say this, but Sheena and I got a really special invitation to go to the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C., which was the first public event that President Barack Obama actually had. It's the first thing in there, at least it was then, the first thing in the official diary. And it was wonderful, and we bought our tickets, we got on a plane, we stayed in a hotel, we got up at a ridiculously early time in the morning to go to the Hilton Hotel, which is where the banquet was held. Went through, I don't know how much security details and checks and scans and all the things that we did to sit down and wait for an hour and a half for the president to come, and Tony Blair, I think, was the other guest that people might know the name of. Sadly, those in the Hilton Hotel didn't invert the guest list. So when President Obama stood on stage, he was about that size there from where we were seated. But it was a really amazing experience. And actually, out of that experience has come some really fantastic friendships and learnings and partnerships. I'm so grateful. My spiritual director for many of the last 15 years was sat down beside me at one of the side dinners that took place after the event. Jesus wants us now, as we're thinking about hospitality, to remember the hospitality God has shown us, because it motivates everything else that we do. And he wants us to understand that in this story, you notice in verse 24, he switches from the kind of third person to the first person. He's talking about the kingdom that he's about. He's talking about the invitation he is given. And the tragedy part of it is that the people for whom the invitation should have been the most obvious and the most responded to are not the ones who come. Like in Jesus' day, there was always a double invitation. Maybe it's the same. You probably get a text message today as well. But there was always the first invitation to say, I'm planning this big meal, this big occasion, and we'd love you to come. And then when things were sorted, you would always get the second invitation to say, everything's ready. So come on, let's come and get together. And this first invitation has gone out to all those in the community as expected. And then when the second one comes out, Jesus then entertains us a little bit by giving us these ludicrous excuses that people have to say. Let me just read you some of the things that are there. First of all, I have bought a field and I must go and see it. Will it not be there tomorrow? That's interesting. And why would you have bought it if you haven't seen it anyway? Who does that? Secondly, I bought 5 yoke of oxen and on my way to try them out. Again, will they not be there tomorrow? And why would you have bought them if you're not sure they were worth the payment? Or maybe the best one of all, I just got married, so I can't come. And the readers or the first hearers of these would have smiled as Jesus said that. What a bunch of pathetic excuses. And Jesus tells us this because of the tragedy of Israel. In a way, they had their double invitation. Far in advance, the coming of God's Messiah was announced to Israel through the Old Testament, through Moses, through the prophets. They knew he was coming. And then through John the Baptist and others, then this second invitation comes. He's now here. Come, let's celebrate. And what happens? People look to other things and decide that other things are more important. And so they turn down this invitation. But the wonder of it is the next part. I grew up in a pretty rough estate. As my friend reminded me yesterday, I may not have always been an ideal child in my upbringing. And I suppose in my innermost being, I didn't think I was very much. There was one particular neighbor who used to tell me that I wasn't very much. So it's okay, neither were my family. My brothers and sisters were all in the same boat. And I didn't imagine that I was very valuable. I didn't imagine that my life was very important. And as I've told you before, there was lots of violence and incidents. The big box factory, when it burned down just down the road from us, that caused the windows in my school to fall out. You've heard that story before. I remember standing on my doorway thinking, is this really it? Is this really all there is to life? And then I got invited to go along to a Christian youth group. And I started to hear about Jesus of history as opposed to my cultural view of him or my ignorant view of him. I got to see about this love and this life that God has now called us to in his Son. And I realized there's a whole lot more to me. And I think part of the greatest wonder today as we come to the bread and wine of communion is in God's eyes, every single one of us is the same. There is no difference. It doesn't matter where we're from. It doesn't matter the mistakes of our past. It doesn't matter what language we prefer to speak in. It doesn't matter our economic status, what job we have, or if we don't have a job, whether we've been a really great person in our contribution or a really terrible person and have lots of failure that seems to sit on our shoulders day after day, week after week. In the gospel, what we discover is that the God of the universe loves every one of us. And Jesus has dealt with our sin. We can't, but we don't have to. He has dealt with it. And when we put our faith in him, this God who created us delights to give us a second chance, and a third chance, and a 50th chance, or whatever it may be. And in Jesus' teaching about hospitality, he wants us to remember the hospitality that God has shown us. And it's wondrous. It's wondrous. And every person and every place that we've traveled from this morning needs to know that. And our job is to get it, is to receive it into our own lives, is to figure out how to live it out and wonder with each other, and then to go out to all these places and share the same message. And there is no better place to begin than with the bread and wine of communion. How much do you matter to God? Well, here's the proof. Can you really be forgiven? Here's the proof. Do you matter? Is this really for someone like you? Here is the proof. And as we take this bread and we take this wine today, I think we can pray concerning the tragedy of those who have heard the invitation and allow themselves to instead choose other things. But we can also pray in wonder and in celebration that God included us. And because of Jesus, each one of us is now wanted and welcome at the feast. So let Jesus' teaching be an encouragement, a challenge, whatever it needs to be today. And may these next moments together be truly special for us as we remember the truth about him and the truth about us and the truth about what he's done for us on the cross.